you. We now come to the Conservative spokesman, the Shadow Minister, Saqib Bhatti.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship, and it's a privilege to respond to this moving and sadly often harrowing debate. I'd like to put on record that I'm actually the Vice Chair of the APPG on anti-Semitism, but I'd also like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Leeds South West and Morley for securing this incredibly important debate and for his dedication to this cause and his moving speech. I also recognise the contribution from my good friend, the Honourable friend, my Honourable friend from Beaconsfield, who passionately set out why this is such an important debate and why we're all here, even though we wish we didn't have to be. Jewish students are facing some of the worst anti-Semitic abuse in society and in our universities. According to the Community Security Trust, there are over 9,000 Jewish students studying at universities across the UK. They have found a terrifying rise in anti-Semitism in the UK. In 22-23, there were 53 university-related anti-Semitic incidents. This rose to 272 in 2023-24, the highest total recorded for a single academic year. The Union of Jewish Students have published a harrowing report highlighting the concerning fact that anti-Semitism is now effectively normalised on our campuses. It found that 1 in 4 students have seen behaviour that explicitly targets Jewish students for their religion. More broadly, it demonstrates that universities are failing to confront the open glorification of terrorism. Nearly half of students have heard chants glorifying prescribed terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and their research also shows student groups have explicitly called for violence against Jews, even justifying the sickening terrorist attack at Bondi Beach last year. As well as the terrible glorification of violence and the sense that anti-Semitism is normal because it never goes unpunished, anti-Semitic protests also disrupt students' learning. And universities where students have witnessed Israel-Palestinian protests, those students feel it still goes unaddressed. 4 in 10 students have seen Jewish students harassed. Sir John, Britain has a proud history of tolerance, but we cannot be complacent in our fight to protect our fundamental values of decency, tolerance and support for each other. And I think members across the House, and I thank them for this, spoke up from all parties, spoke up in solidarity with those British Jewish students. However, these freedoms, which are fundamental to our democracy and proud traditions, are under ever-increasing threat. Society is becoming more fractured, driven by divisive rhetoric, online and offline, which drives populism and pushes more people to the extreme. For the hundreds of thousands of Jewish people in the UK, our more divided society is having a real impact on their everyday lives. The Community Security Trust estimates that there were over 300 anti-Semitic incidents per month in 2025, double the number the year preceding the war in the Middle East. Student testimony collected by organisations like the CST, the Union of Jewish Students and the Pinsker Centre have demonstrated the hostile environment faced by Jewish students on campus since October 23. And I want to share some of those comments. Some of those instances have already been shared. One was from a focus group run by the Pinsker Centre. One student said, "Some people suddenly radicalised after October the 7th now don't speak to me. They've blocked me on social media, they ignore me, they've explicitly told me that I am complicit in genocide." In summer 2024, a Jewish Society committee member in Bristol approached the pro-Palestinian encampment to have a civil conversation. That night, he was recognised, physically attacked and assaulted in a nightclub by individuals who had heard him earlier in the day. His shirt was ripped and his back was covered in scratches and cuts. And too often we hear about Jewish students being abused because they are wearing the kipput or the skull cap, and for that reason being chased and attacked. A Royal Holloway student, as we heard earlier, Velda, who I spoke to today, received calls in which the caller read out his home address and warned that they were coming to get him alongside an explicit threat to blow up the Jewish society. He told me he got these calls 10 times a day, and at one point, because his address was publicised, bloody period pads were put outside his door. A professor at Bangor University, as we heard earlier, physically attacked a student while calling him a baby killer, a medieval anti-Semitic trope. I spoke to Evelyn today from UCL, who told me about how she was just at an anti-Semitism stall. She was approached and called an effing white supremacist bitch. And I paraphrase because the abuse went on and on. She had a recording, and last week she found out that no action was being taken. I hear repeatedly about how many members of the faculty in UCL are members of the BDS movement, which clearly is helping to exacerbate this situation. I spoke to Ben from the LSE, who told me about a book which said, the launch of a book which was titled Hamas and Why It Matters. Hamas and Why It Matters. Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters. I just want to get that correct. Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters. And there was a protest outside the book launch, and there was a counter-protest to the protest. And he eloquently said to me, if you're counter-protesting a protest against a proscribed terrorist organisation, what does that make you? A King's College student had to write, as we heard earlier, a 1,000-word essay explaining why it had been wrong to display an Israeli flag on campus. Imagine if that had been a Palestinian flag. Would the result have been the same? The list goes on and on. So, John, something has gone horribly wrong. It is quite clear that a permissive culture of anti-Semitism and abuse has been allowed to fester. Anti-Semitism is being covered up as activism and protest. Hate is being legitimised, and British Jews are being left isolated and living in fear. Our Jewish communities need us, and in this moment, we cannot falter. I am pleased that the government have announced some new steps to ensure universities publish the scale of anti-Semitism on campuses. This is a welcome step forward, but we do need further clarity on what exactly the government will do, and I asked the Minister to address this. If universities are still failing to tackle anti-Semitism, which I've already listed some examples of, saying, of course, that we will set out next steps in due course is not enough. Our Jewish community need to know today what the government is intending to do to clamp down on this. The Shadow Education Secretary has said that universities that fail to clamp down on anti-Semitism should have their funding stripped to ensure that there are real and serious consequences for failing to stamp out anti-Semitism. So I therefore ask the Minister if they can identify the steps that they will take to punish universities that have allowed anti-Semitism to become normalised. Too many students tell me that there is not a sufficient complaint system for them, and the Office for the Independent Adjudicator, who they'd have to go to, has no meaningful sanctions. And we need a complaint system that does work for students. I encourage the Minister to look at that, and I know my honourable friend for Windsor wrote to him about that. He's yet to receive a reply, so I hope the Minister can address that. And I want to ask the Minister if he is working with the Office for Students to better tackle anti-Semitism. I recognise that an independent investigation into anti-Semitism in schools, colleges and universities is due by the autumn, but can the Minister, as has already been asked by other members, update the House on its specific timetabling, as the evidence we have heard today shows just how important it is that we tackle anti-Semitism most urgently. And lastly, the importance of this debate cannot be underestimated. It goes above party politics. So I do want to offer my sincere support to the Minister on helping the government tackle extremism of all kinds at our universities. But let me conclude by saying this to British Jews. His Majesty's opposition will never shy away for standing up for British Jews. And we on this side of the House will do so without fear, knowing we are standing up for what is right. There are too many platitudes, too many never-agains, and yet nothing changes. Too often, when I meet British Jews, and I met some yesterday, I see fear and anxiety in their eyes. I hear too often that they aren't sure if this country, their country, is safe for them. To hear about raging anti-Semitism on our university campuses, which should be a safe place for all, is a stain on our society. A future Conservative government will ensure that universities will not allow anti-Semitism to fester. Those that do not comply will face the toughest of sanctions. Where hate preachers come to this country to spread hate, under the Conservatives, they will be deported. Where the law is broken, we will empower the police to enforce the law to its fullest extent. So to British Jews, let me say this. Your fight is our fight. You are of us and we are of you. We will not fail you in this endeavour.